The night was as thick as blood, and torrential rain poured down, as if the heavens were wailing in anticipation of the impending tragedy. Before the palace's iron gates, a woman covered in blood was crawling forward with her last ounce of strength. Her fingernails had long since snapped off, digging deep into the muddy crevices of the stone, each drag producing a bone-chilling screech. Rain mixed with blood streamed down her cheeks. Her chest throbbed as if torn apart, and a thick, rusty taste welled up in her throat. "I can't die here." She clenched her teeth. Though her voice was swallowed by the thunder, it carried a stubbornness bordering on madness. Everything before her was spinning. The resplendent lights of the palace seemed like phantoms mocking her. She knew that if she was a moment too late, she would meet her end at the hands of her enemies. Her name was Ella, the star of calamity, chosen by prophecy, raised from childhood by her clan as a sacrificial offering. They had taught her with whips, chains, and lies. Only by finding the Alpha King of the werewolf empire could she survive. Or rather, ensure the entire conspiracy continued. Ella's hand finally touched the cold iron gate, but her body went limp, and she collapsed heavily like a broken sack. Her soaked long hair clung to her pale face. Her lips were a terrifying shade of purple, and beneath her tattered cloak lay layer upon layer of whip marks and knife wounds. The rain mercilessly washed over those wounds, the pain causing her vision to darken as her consciousness flickered like a candle in the wind. The palace gates burst open with a thunderous crash. Heavy, oppressive footsteps echoed instantly, each step like a war drum pounding against her heart. Black leather boots came to a halt before her, and a towering figure loomed over her, radiating a suffocating alpha aura. The air suddenly exploded with an overwhelmingly intense pheasant and musk pheromone, igniting everything like wildfire. Kyle von Lucifer, the supreme ruler of the werewolf clan, his silver-gray eyes suddenly narrowed in the darkness. In that moment, his soul felt as if struck by lightning. The red thread of destined mate tightened around his heart, and the wolf within his chest roared wildly, nearly bursting through his skin. His blood boiled, and every nerve in his body screamed, "This is his. This dying woman is the one and only mate heaven has bestowed upon him. Damn it. What the hell is going on?" He growled, his voice low and hoarse, yet trembling with uncontrollable emotion. His movement was astonishingly swift. His broad hands swept out without hesitation, cradling Ella's cold body in his arms. The sensation felt like an electric current, striking his soul. Her scent was sweet yet bitter, like a moonlit rose torn apart by fate itself. A perfect fit for the part of him that had been missing for so many years. In her semi-conscious state, Ella forced her eyes open, seeing only the man's firm jawline and eyes that had suddenly grown as deep and dark as an abyss. She weakly tugged at the corners of her mouth, her voice as thin as a thread, yet laced with a final flicker of defiance. "Alpha King," they said, "only you can save me or kill me." Before she could finish, her head lolled to one side, and she fell into a deep, unconscious slumber. Kyle stood up, holding her in his arms. Rain poured down his dark hair, yet his expression was like a volcano on the verge of eruption, a calm exterior concealing a storm of earth. Shattering intensity, his chief guard rushed over, panic-stricken. "Your Majesty, this woman." "Shut up. Summon the medic. Everyone else, get out." Kyle's command was as cold as a blade radiating murderous intent. He held her tightly as if she might vanish into thin air at any moment. As he strode into the palace with Ella in his arms, the wolf within him had already sworn a vow deep in his soul. Whoever dared to touch her, he would wipe their entire clan from the face of the earth. This was the cruelest opening act of fate. It brings you face to face with the most important person in your life, at your most desperate and vulnerable moment. Yet it also presses a knife's edge directly against both your hearts. Winning her might cost the entire kingdom, or even the entire race. Deep within the palace, candlelight flickered erratically. Kyle laid Ella gently on his wide bed and tore open her soaked, tattered clothes with his own hands. When he saw the horrifying scars, both old and new, covering her body, the wolf within him lost all control. A low growl rolled up from the depths of his throat, and his fingertips trembled slightly as they brushed against the deepest whip mark on her shoulder. In her unconscious state, Ella instinctively leaned into the palm of his hand, like a drowning person grasping at a last straw. This subtle movement, however, caused the mighty Alpha King's heart to clench so tightly it nearly took his breath away. He had never believed in fate, much less the nonsense that true love could conquer all. Yet now, this battered woman, abandoned by the entire world, lay in his bed, her bloodline frantically calling to the wolf within him. Two souls, torn apart for years, had finally found their home in this moment. Outside the window, the torrential rain continued to rage, and within this palace, a symbol of power, an emotional war more fierce than the storm had quietly begun. Those ancient forces lurking in the shadows of the royal family, those hidden hands manipulating prophecies and using Ella as a pawn, those clans that had once pushed her to the brink of death. They could never have imagined in their wildest dreams that their star of misfortune was not only alive, but had fallen directly into the king's arms and into his bed. And this Alpha King, who had always been cold-blooded and ruthless, had already made his decision, even if it meant bathing the entire kingdom in blood, even if it meant shattering every taboo. He would keep her by his side, protect her, cherish her, and possess her. As night gradually gave way to dawn, the palace corridors were left with nothing but the gently flickering shadows of candlelight. The flames crackled softly in the breeze, their rhythm as irregular as a heartbeat. When Ella awoke, her first sensation was a long-forgotten, almost unfamiliar warmth. The soft silk sheets clung tightly to her scarred skin. With every shallow breath, the whip marks on her chest and back, still oozing blood, twinged, the pain feeling like countless fine needles twisting within her flesh. She instinctively shrugged her shoulders. The intense scent of cedar mixed with musk, the alpha pheromone, still lingered on her nose and tongue, sweet yet bitter, burning down her throat like strong liquor and making the blood in her entire body feel faintly hot. The room was terrifyingly vast. Heavy gold, threaded drapes hung from the canopy above the bed, brushing lightly against her arms and leaving a faintly cool sensation. The ancient wolf head crests on the walls cast menacing shadows in the candlelight, as if they were staring at her silently. The air echoed with the heavy footsteps of the wolf guard on patrol in the distance and the clinking of metal. The door creaked open, the sound particularly jarring in the quiet room. Kyle's towering figure appeared in the doorway. He was wearing a deep black robe, the fabric clinging tightly to his broad chest and outlining his muscular form. His silver-gray eyes flashed with a sharp intensity in the dim candlelight. Seeing that she had awakened, he came to an abrupt halt, his Adam's apple bobbing as he drew heavy, audible breaths. "Don't move." His voice was low and hoarse, like a muffled thunderclap rumbling from the depths of his chest, tinged with uncontrollable tension. "The medic said you've lost too much blood. If you move around, the wound will tear open. That kind of pain, you've already had enough of it." Ella forced herself to sit up, and the tearing sensation in her shoulder intensified instantly. She clenched her teeth, cold sweat beading on her forehead. The memory of him carrying her in the rain last night flashed into her mind like a bolt of lightning. The strength of those powerful arms, the scorching heat of his chest, the wild scent of rain mixed with pheromones, all terrifyingly vivid. She instinctively pulled the blanket over her chest, her fingertips brushing against the raised old scars on her skin, rough and cold. "My name is Ella," she said hoarsely, each word scraping at her throat. I escaped from the Grey Wolf clan in the north. They said I'm the harbinger of doom from the prophecy, and that only by finding you could I break the curse. But now I think it was all just a carefully woven trap. Kyle approached the bed, his heavy body causing the chair to creak deeply beneath him. As he sat down, his towering figure completely blocked half the candlelight, casting a shadow over her face. His alpha pheromones intensified instantly, washing over her like an invisible heat wave. Ella's body grew hot against her will, and a strange flutter rose deep within her lower abdomen. A pull that made her want to flee, yet left her unable to resist drawing closer to the scent that allowed her to momentarily forget the pain. That fateful pull felt like two magnets, forcibly torn apart, finally coming into contact. The attraction so powerful it nearly tore her soul apart. She continued, her voice trembling slightly yet carrying a stubborn edge. As she recalled those dark days, her fingernails dug deep into her palms, turning white with pain. Locked away in an underground stone chamber from childhood, cold iron chains rubbed against her ankles day and night, leaving permanent red marks. The elders whipped her daily with silver lashes. The shrill whistle of the whip cutting through the air, the dull thud of flesh tearing, and her own stifled screams, all remain vivid in her memory. They forced her to recite ancient rituals, growling as they lashed her, "You are the key. You must sacrifice the Alpha King's power to the Shadow Moon Council so that our Grey Wolf clan may reclaim the throne." As Ella spoke, her eyes reddened and her chest heaved violently. Every breath tugged at the wounds on her back, causing a searing pain. She lifted her head and met Kyle's gaze, which grew ever more profound. What they truly wanted was to use the Moon Shadow bloodline within me to control you. Those in the Shadow Moon Council, lurking in the shadows, manipulate the prophecies of the great tribes, instigate war after war, and keep all werewolves living in fear, all to maintain their secret rule forever. The day I escaped, they were preparing for the final sacrificial ritual. I killed the guards, stole a horse, and was chased all the way here, my blood dripping all the way to the gates of your palace. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Only the faint crackling of the candles and the sound of their increasingly heavy breathing could be heard. Kyle suddenly stood up, his towering frame stirring a gust of wind as the hem of his robe swept across the floor with a rustle. His shoulders were tense, his fists clenched until his knuckles turned white, and his silver-gray eyes churned with anger, possessiveness, and heartache, like the sea before a storm. His own past was equally blood-stained. His father died in an accidental palace coup. His mother took her own life, and he tore the traitor to pieces with his own hands, though in doing so he froze his heart into ice. A saying had long circulated within the clan. A powerful Alpha King must have no mate, for that would become the enemy's sharpest blade. Now, that blade lay in his bed. He turned his back to her, his voice low and hoarse yet carrying an unyielding authority. "From this day forward you stay here. Anyone who dares come looking for you, I'll make them regret ever being born." Ella's heart skipped a beat. She saw a flicker of tenderness in Kyle's eyes, a tenderness he wasn't even aware of, like a warm flame searing her frozen soul. She asked softly, "Then aren't you afraid I might be a pawn sent by the enemy?" Kyle strode back to the bed and reached out to lift her chin. The rough texture of his fingertips brushed against her delicate yet scarred skin, sending waves of electric tingling through her. Their eyes locked, pheromones swirling wildly in the air like invisible flames licking at their skin. He lowered his head, pressing his forehead against hers, his scorching breath washing over her lips as his voice, heavy as an oath, spoke. "I am afraid, but I'm more afraid of losing you. From the moment I picked you up, you've been mine. No one can take you away." In that instant, Ella could no longer hold back her tears. All the grievances, fears, and loneliness of the past years burst forth, like a flood breaking through a dam. She grasped his strong wrist. The scorching heat in his palm made her feel for the first time perhaps she could finally stop shouldering the entire conspiracy alone. This is the cruelest yet gentlest aspect of fate. It throws two people, both scarred and battered by the world, into each other's arms, binding them together with blood and pain, yet also granting them the strength to heal and protect one another. True love is never a calm sea. It is about gritting your teeth and charging forward together, even if the path ahead is a sea of fire and a mountain of blades set by the Shadow Moon Council. Outside the palace, the morning light was gradually brightening, and the faint howl of wolves echoed from the distant forest. Yet no one could have known that this budding romance had already been quietly swept into a far greater political storm. The Shadow Moon Council's dark hand was reaching out from the shadows. The gears of an ancient prophecy were turning frantically, and the intrigues between the clans were tightening like a net, ready to swallow them both at any moment. And as for Ella and Kyle, from this moment on, their fates were inextricably intertwined, never to be separated again. The night breeze poured in through the palace's high windows, carrying the low growls of beasts from deep within the forest and the musty scent of damp earth. The candle flame flickered violently, casting menacing shadows on the wall that looked like countless hands clawing at the surface. Ella stood before Kyle, her freshly bandaged wound still throbbing faintly. Every heartbeat sent a searing, tearing sensation through her back. She could clearly hear her own rapid breathing, as well as the low, wolfish howl echoing from within Kyle's chest. The muffled sound an alpha makes when suppressing his possessiveness, causing her lower abdomen to tighten in waves. 3 days had passed. She remained in this gilded palace, resplendent yet rife with undercurrents. By day, Kyle would personally watch over her bedside, wiping the cold sweat from her forehead with his rough yet gentle fingertips. By night, he would hold her close, letting her fall asleep pressed against his scorching chest. That scent of cedar and musk seeped into every inch of her skin like a drug, leaving her both addicted and terrified. But today, everything had changed. The emissaries of the Shadow Moon Council have arrived. Kyle's voice was hoarse, laced with a metallic harshness. He stood by the window, his towering figure rimmed in silver by the moonlight, clutching a gold-embossed parchment so tightly that the paper emitted a faint, crisp crackling sound. They say you are a harbinger of disaster and must be sacrificed immediately. Otherwise, the entire werewolf empire will suffer the calamity of the lunar eclipse. Ella's heart plummeted to the depths of despair. Her bare feet pressed against the cold marble floor. The chill crept up from the soles of her feet, and the wound on her back felt as if it had been torn open anew. She could smell the tense pheromones mingling in the air. Kyle's wild scent was spiraling out of control, so intense it nearly knocked her off her feet. I knew it all along. She gave a bitter smile, her voice trembling. They never intended to let me live. They raised me for this very day, to use my bloodline to awaken the dark power within you, and then take your throne. Kyle spun around abruptly, striding toward her and pulling her into his embrace. His strong arms clamped around her waist like iron bands, the pressure so intense it took her breath away. The sound of his heartbeat thundered in her ear, wild as a war drum. Ella could feel the scorching heat of his chest, searing through the thin fabric of her clothes, and the prickly itch of his rough stubble against her hair, as his chin rested on the top of her head. They won't get a chance, Kyle growled, his voice rumbling from deep within his throat with the ferocity of a wolf. You're mine. Anyone who dares touch you, I'll rip their throat out. In that moment, Ella's tears finally broke free. She clutched the front of his robe with both hands, her fingernails digging into the fabric, her body trembling slightly with fear and emotion. All the years of flight, beatings, and loneliness found release in this embrace. Yet, she knew all too well that this embrace might be nothing more than a fleeting illusion. Suddenly, hurried footsteps and the clang of metal echoed from outside the door. The captain of the guard's voice was strained and low, yet tinged with panic. Your Majesty, the Grey Wolf tribe's army has gathered at the border. The Shadow Moon Council has publicly declared Ella a traitor, demanding her execution to quell the curse of the prophecy. Even within the palace, there are elders secretly supporting them. Kyle's body tensed instantly. Ela could feel every muscle in his frame harden like rock, the veins on his arms bulging as he held her. The pheromones in the air grew frenzied, like a volcano on the verge of eruption. "Betrayal," he spat, his voice as cold as an ice blade. "Those old fools have been waiting for this moment ever since my father died. They want to use my mate as a sacrifice to secure their own power." Ella looked up, her tear-filled eyes fixed on his strong jawline. She reached out to touch his face, her fingertips brushing against his taut muscles and burning skin. "Kyle, if sacrificing me could bring peace, you—" "Shut up." Kyle suddenly lowered his head and kissed her lips fiercely. The kiss carried the taste of blood and despair. Their teeth clashed and their tongues entwined, as if he were trying to swallow her whole. Ella tasted the saltiness of her own tears, along with the faint scent of alcohol on his breath. Her back slammed against the wall, the wound burning like fire, yet that pain mingled with the ecstasy of her racing heart, making her feel as if she were melting. When the kiss ended, their foreheads pressed together, their ragged breaths intertwining. "I'd rather burn the entire kingdom to the ground than let you die." Kyle's voice was hoarse yet resolute, every word striking her heart. "You aren't the key, you're my life." But just then, a piercing wolf's howl echoed from the depths of the palace. It was followed by screams, the clang of combat, and the shrill hum of magic exploding. The Shadow Moon Council's mole had struck. They had unleashed the ancient curse mist right within the palace. The black fog surged through the corridors, like a living entity, carrying the stench of decay and blood. Ella's body suddenly shook violently. The moon shadow bloodline within her had been activated, and eerie silver patterns emerged on her skin, like countless tiny snakes slithering across her body. Pain surged through her like a tidal wave. She screamed and collapsed to her knees, her fingernails digging into the floor until blood seeped out. "Ella." Kyle lunged forward to hold her, his voice filled with a terror he had never before shown. His wolf had completely lost control. His eyes turned crimson, gold fangs bared as he tried to suppress the rampage within her with his own pheromones. They cast a blood curse long ago. Ella's body convulsed with pain, her voice breaking. "If I don't make the sacrifice, you'll lose control and become the monster the prophecy foretold." Kyle pressed her tightly against his chest, offering her his final warmth. His palm rested on the wound on her back. Blood stained his fingers, and the searing sensation tore at his heart. "Then let them see clearly." He raised his head and let out a deafening roar at the surging black mist. "I, Kyle von Lucifer, hereby declare war on the Shadow Moon Council. Whoever dares lay a hand on my woman, I will make their blood stain the entire moon red." The terrified screams of the elders could be faintly heard from within the black mist. Political intrigues, ancient prophecies, and tribal power struggles. At this moment, they tore away their masks, transforming into a battlefield of blood and fire. Amidst the excruciating pain, Ella clutched his hand, her tears mingling with blood. "Kyle, I'm scared." "Don't be afraid." He kissed her forehead, his voice gentle yet carrying a resolve to destroy everything. "As long as I'm here, you are not a pawn. You are my queen." This is the cruelest tug of war of fate. It binds two people together with blood and pain, yet also forces them to resist the world's conspiracy together. True love is never about hiding in safety. It is about standing shoulder to plunge a blade into the enemy's heart. Even if the whole world abandons you, the storm has only just begun. Ella leaned against Kyle's broad chest, her body still trembling slightly. The curse of the moon shadow bloodline felt like countless tiny knives churning through her veins, each heartbeat bringing excruciating, tearing pain. She could feel her skin burning. Silver patterns crawled across her arms like living creatures, and everything in her vision was veiled in a haze of blood. Kyle's arms held her tightly, his rough palms pressed against the still bleeding wound on her back. That scorching heat and the faint tremor in his grip were the only salvation she could cling to at that moment. "Hang on." Kyle's voice was hoarse, almost breaking. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, his hot breath washing over the sensitive skin behind her ear, his fangs grazing it lightly without piercing. "I've already killed 3 elders of the Shadow Moon Council. Their blood has stained the throne hall red. But you can't leave me." The final sounds of battle came from outside. The roars of the guards and the rebellious wolf pack, the dull thud of breaking bones, and the shrill hum of magic exploding. Ella's ears rang. She forced her head up and saw that Kyle's silver-gray eyes had turned completely crimson. Gold, the wolf savagery was on the verge of swallowing his sanity. It was the dark power from the prophecy at work. If she did not make the sacrifice, he would become a monster that knew only slaughter. I don't want to die." Tears mixed with blood trickled down Ella's cheeks, her voice faint yet tinged with a final stubbornness. She dug her fingers into his hard pectorals, her nails digging into his skin, causing a sharp sting. "But if my death can keep you alive, Kyle, promise me you'll live, and then destroy them for me." "No," Kyle roared, his voice shaking the very pinnacle of the tower. He pulled her closer, his chest heaving violently, his heartbeat pounding against her eardrums like war drums. "I'd rather die with you than live alone in a world without you. You are my destined mate. From the moment you collapsed at my palace gates, I've staked my soul on you." He lowered his head and kissed her blood-tinged lips fiercely. The kiss was driven by desperate madness, teeth clattering, tongues entwined, as if he were trying to swallow her whole. Ella tasted his tears. The Alpha King, so powerful he had never shown weakness before anyone, was actually crying. The salty taste mixed with his pheromones slid down her throat, temporarily enveloping all her pain in a searing sense of healing. Just then, the moonlight suddenly became blinding. The power of an ancient prophecy was fully awakened within their intertwined bloodlines. A silver pillar of light descended from the sky, enveloping them both. Ella's body was racked with excruciating pain. She arched her back and screamed, yet she felt Kyle's wolf spirit surging desperately into her, using the most primal alpha power to fight against the curse. Ah! The pain surged in waves, like a tidal flood, yet deep within that agony, she suddenly sensed a warmth she had never known before. Fragments of Kyle's memories flashed through her mind like scenes from a film. The loneliness of his childhood, the blood-soaked night his father was assassinated, his mother's silent cries as she took her own life, the icy weight of shouldering the entire kingdom alone all these years. Everything overlapped perfectly with her own scars. It turned out they were both souls trapped in the same net. The pillar of light gradually faded. The silver patterns on Ella's body slowly faded away, and her wounds healed at a visible pace. She opened her eyes weakly and saw that Kyle's eyes had also returned to their silver-gray hue, though his gaze now held an unprecedented tenderness and resolve. He held her tightly in his arms, resting his chin against the top of her head. His rough stubble brushed lightly against her hair, sending tingles of pleasure through her. "The curse has been broken," Ella murmured, her voice filled with disbelief and delight. "Not through sacrifice, but through our union." Kyle let out a low chuckle, hoarse yet tinged with the relief of having survived a catastrophe. He scooped her up in his arms and strode down from the tower's summit, each step treading upon the blood of the rebels. Guards were everywhere in the palace, cleaning up the battlefield, upon seeing their king approaching with a woman in his arms. They all silently bowed their heads in salute. From this day forward, there will be no more Shadow Moon Council, no more damned prophecies. Kyle's voice echoed through the hall, cold yet carrying the unquestionable authority of a king. "I, Kyle von Lucifer, will rebuild a werewolf empire, free of manipulation and sacrifice, alongside my queen. Let anyone who dares to stand in our way taste the true wrath of destiny." Ella leaned against his chest, listening to his powerful heartbeat, and for the first time felt truly safe. She reached out to caress his face, her fingertips tracing the line of his jaw. "I am no longer a pawn. I can finally be myself." This was fate's gentlest redemption. It had cast the two of them into despair in the cruelest way, yet it had also allowed them to find each other amidst blood and fire, shattering every chain that bound them. True love is never about evading the cost, but about bravely facing every conspiracy, and then tearing that darkness to shreds together. Months later, the kingdom celebrated a new grand festival. Ella, dressed in a silvery white robe, stood beside Kyle, basking in the cheers of her subjects. She had fully awakened, no longer the hunted fugitive. She was now the werewolf queen with her own independent power. Kyle's hand remained clasped tightly around hers, their fingers intertwined, and the warmth in his palm became her most reliable anchor. The dark forces that once manipulated the prophecies had been utterly obliterated. The wars between clans had subsided, replaced by genuine alliances and trust. Sisters, after hearing this story, do you believe, even if the whole world treats you like a pawn, even if fate leaves you covered in scars, as long as you bravely crawl to the right person, true love will illuminate all the darkness? Don't be afraid of getting hurt. Don't be afraid of paying the price, because the alpha who truly belongs to you will trade his life for the rest of yours. Sisters who love this story, give it a like and save it. Listen to it again when you can't sleep at night. In our next story, we'll continue exploring those forbidden, yet healing werewolf romances. Remember to follow me, and together, let's find our own redemption and strength through these audio stories. The above is the original paragraph, unedited. The following is expanded content, deeply incorporating details of the Secret Alliance, approximately 3,000 words, continuing the pure narration style and sensory imagery. However, the apparent calm was merely a false facade before the storm. The remnants of the Shadow Moon Council had not truly perished. They had transformed into the even more covert Shadow Alliance, an underground coalition composed of pure, blooded nobles, border warlords, and ancient sorcerers. This alliance had taken shape as early as during Kyle's father's reign, manipulating every undercurrent in the kingdom through messengers cloaked in layers of disguise, encrypted magical scrolls, and secret midnight meetings. On the third night, following the grand celebration, Ella sensed that something was amiss. In the corridors of the palace's side chambers, the candlelight flickered with an eerie intensity. She walked barefoot across the cold marble, a chill creeping up the soles of her feet, while an old wound on her back throbbed faintly, as if to remind her that danger was never far away. She caught a whiff of a pheromone in the air that did not belong to Kyle, a scent of rotting wood and aged blood that made her stomach clench involuntarily. She quietly pushed open a half-closed side door, and a sinister scene immediately came into view. 3 nobles clad in black robes were gathered around a round table, covered in wolfskin, conversing in hushed tones. Leading them was the white-haired duke who had questioned her at the grand ceremony. The sound of his knuckles tapping the tabletop was crisp and cold, like death counting down. The Shadow Alliance cannot be allowed to disband. That lowly half-blood woman has already driven the king mad. Once the new laws are enacted, our lands, taxes, and the privileges of the purebloods will all be carved up. We must act before the coronation. Another border warlord's voice was hoarse, grating like metal on metal. I have contacted the remaining elders of the 3 northern tribes. Their hatred for the Grey Wolf bloodline runs deeper than ours. Ella killed many of them when she fled, and they are willing to provide 1,000 elite wolf riders as inside agents. If we poison the palace water supply with lunar eclipse toxin to trigger another bloodlust in her, the king will tear her apart with his own hands. Ella's heart sank to the pit of her stomach. Her fingers dug desperately into the doorframe, The pain of her broken nails shot through her nerves straight to her brain, and the rusty taste of blood mixed with fear made her throat tighten. So the secret alliance had never ceased. They had merely moved from the forefront to the shadows, weaving a new web of intricate intrigue. Class divisions had become their most potent weapon. High-ranking nobles promised more lands to pure, blooded warlords, while traders from lower-class tribes were bought off with money and false prophecies, forming a dark chain that spanned social strata. She made no sound as she slipped back to her bedchamber. Kyle was leaning against the headboard waiting for her. His broad chest rose and fell in the candlelight, and his silver-gray eyes softened the moment he saw her. He reached out to pull her into his arms, his rough palm brushing against her skin and sending waves of warmth through her. "What's wrong? You look so pale." Ella buried her face in the crook of his neck, inhaling the familiar scent of cedar and musk, her voice barely a whisper. "Kyle, the Shadow Alliance is still active. They met in secret tonight in the side hall. The Duke, the Warlord, and the elders of my former tribe. They plan to use poison and an inside man to make my bloodline go haywire before the coronation, forcing you to kill me with your own hands." Kyle's body tensed instantly, hard as rock. He clasped her tightly, and Ella could hear the wolf's low growl rumbling in his chest, like muffled thunder. She felt his heartbeat suddenly quicken. His scorching body heat seared through the fabric into her skin, and the pheromones, a mix of rage and protective instinct, nearly overwhelmed her. Over the next few days, the Secret Alliance's activities grew increasingly frequent. On the surface, Kyle continued to enforce the new laws, but in secret, he sent trusted agents to infiltrate the League. Ella, meanwhile, used her newly awakened Moonshadow bloodline to disguise herself as a lowly servant and infiltrate noble mansions to eavesdrop on intelligence. She witnessed a duchess slitting her wrist with a silver dagger in a secret chamber, letting her blood drip into a magic circle to summon a Shadow League sorcerer. The sorcerer's voice was as cold and venomous as a snake's hiss. "The Alliance has assembled 5,000 shadow guards, stationed across 7 key fortresses in the kingdom. At the signal, the border warlords will rebel, declaring that the king has been bewitched by lowborn bloodlines, and that the purebloods must rise up to defend the empire." The oppressive atmosphere made Ella shiver every time she sneaked back in. The corridors of those noble mansions were perpetually cold and damp, the portraits of ancestors hanging on the walls staring at her as if they were alive, and the scent of incense in the air could not mask the stench of blood and conspiracy. Once she was nearly discovered. A guard's palm brushed roughly across her shoulder, delivering the cold touch of metal and a potent surge of hostile pheromones. She could only grit her teeth and feign a fall to barely escape. After a late-night meeting, Kyle carried her to the window. Outside lay the kingdom's lights inside, their intertwined shadows. He leaned down to kiss her earlobe. His hot breath and the light scrape of his fangs sent a jumble of tingling and stinging sensations through her. The Shadow Alliance is led by 7 founding elders. They use the slogan, "Pure Bloods Forever," to coerce the nobility, employ false prophecies to control warlords, and buy off tribal traders with money. Class division is their foundation. They tell the purebloods that the lower classes will take everything, and tell the lower classes that the royal family only oppresses. My father was assassinated by them, using these very tactics. Ella turned around, cupping his chiseled face with both hands, her fingertips sensing the taut muscles of his jaw and a faint tremor. "Then what do we do? They outnumber us, and their net is cast too wide." A destructive fire flared in Kyle's silver-gray eyes. "We'll do the opposite. At tomorrow's coronation, I'll publicly execute the Duke as bait. You use your bloodline power to sense the Alliance's signal, and I'll lead our elite forces straight to their final lair, Shadowmoon Castle, in the north. That castle appears to be an abandoned temple, but it is actually the Alliance's treasury and command center, housing the wealth plundered over the years and the dark crystal used to manipulate prophecies." On the night of the operation, the storm raged once more. Ella stood on the coronation dais, her body trembling with tension beneath her magnificent robes. She could hear whispers coming from the noble seats, like venomous snakes flickering their tongues, and she could smell the increasingly thick miasma in the air. Just as the Duke was escorted onto the platform by guards, the Secret Alliance's signal was activated. The howls of wolves echoed in the distance, and the border rebels began their move. But Kyle struck first. In the palace's underground passages, he led a mixed force, comprising both pure-blooded officers and warriors from lower tribes, charging toward the ancient castle. In the midst of battle, the clanging of metal, the muffled thud of wolf claws tearing through flesh, and the shrill hum of exploding magic filled his ears. Kyle ripped open a warlord's throat with his own hands. Hot blood spattered across his face, leaving a scorching viscous sensation. He growled, "This is the price you pay for dividing the kingdom by class." Meanwhile, within the palace, Ella was dealing with a traitor. Her bloodline awoke, and a silver light enveloped her body. It felt as if electric currents were coursing through her skin, pain mingled with power. She personally subdued the infiltrating sorcerer, who cursed even as he died. "Lowly half-breed, you'll never change your class." Deep within the ancient castle, the Secret Alliance's final lair was exposed. Mountains of gold coins glinted in the firelight, and the walls were carved with runes that manipulated prophecies. Kyle sliced through the dark crystal with a single stroke of his sword. The shattering sound echoed like the snapping of fate's chains. The Alliance's founding elder knelt on the ground, trembling as he said, "We only sought to maintain order. Pure blood rule is predestined. What is destined is change." Kyle's voice echoed through the castle. "Classes are not innate. They are the product of your conspiracies. The Shadow Alliance is now reduced to ashes." After their victory, Ella and Kyle stood atop the castle ruins. The night breeze blew in, carrying the earthy scent of freedom. Kyle held her tightly in his arms. The warmth from his palms banished all the cold. The cruelty of political intrigue, the layered conspiracies of the Secret Alliance, and the deep wounds caused by class divisions were all utterly shattered in that moment by true love and iron-fisted resolve. Ella had grown from a lowly fugitive into a queen. The reform she championed allowed the lowest, ranking werewolves to hold their heads high for the first time. Kyle, too, completed his transformation from a cold-blooded ruler to a champion of change. The downfall of the Secret Alliance proved this. No matter how intricate the plot, or how deeply entrenched the class barriers, they will crumble when soulmates stand shoulder to shoulder in resistance. True redemption has never been about waiting, but about bravely tearing through the darkness to embrace one's own light.